Curse of the Daycare Man by My Name is M. It was particularly dark that evening. I had just finished a busy, stressful night shift at my part-time job and needed to unwind. So I lay on my bed and reach underneath it for my GBA, which already had a copy of the old Pokémon Silver game inserted with the save file intact. I had restarted the game from scratch not long ago as it was one of my favorite games of all time, and it had been almost a year since my last playthrough. However, after a few days of playing, I had to abandon it again for almost a week due to having other priorities, but I remembered clearly where I left off. I had recently received an Eevee from Bill in Goldenrod after having met him in the Pokémon Center of Ecruteak. I really love both Espeon and Umbreon, but particularly Espeon, and since this Eevee was male, I decided to evolve him into an Umbreon, and breed for another Eevee, that had a chance of being female, to evolve into a more feminine-looking Espeon, my all-time favorite Eeveelution. And so my character was sat on his bike conveniently at the top of Route 33 with both a male Eevee and a Ditto I captured long ago in hand. Previously in the game, I had, for no apparent reason, left a Scyther and a Butterfree at the Daycare Center. They were Pokemon I had captured at Goldenrod's bug-catching contest, and I didn't plan on using them as I had already backtracked and caught a Heracross by headbutting trees. I just felt it kinder to leave them in Daycare than a dark PC box. Call me weird. Money never tends to be a problem in this game. I always end up with far too much, so I really wasn't bothered about paying to get my Pokemon back. Being compatible and opposite-gendered, the two laid quite a few eggs in the past, all containing Caterpies. Whenever there was an egg, a bearded Daycare man would stand outside the building, ready to inform me of the miracle. However, I was not interested in having another useless Pokemon, so each time I turned them down, allowing him to keep around 7 Caterpie eggs for himself. He seemed relatively pleased about this, but perhaps this was in fact not the case. As I rode south, the old man who ran the service along with his wife was standing once again to the right of the entrance to the Daycare Center. I spoke to him. "Your Pokemon had an egg," he said. "Would you like it?" I declined the offer. "I'll keep it then," he responded. "Thanks." Forever cheerful and polite, the Daycare man appeared to be the kind of person who loved all Pokemon and was pleased to have another in his care, even if it was just another common bug. I thought nothing of my actions at this point. It had not even crossed my mind that perhaps I had been abusing the service. And so what if I had? It was just a game, all data and pixels. There was no crime in getting an elderly couple to pointlessly level a Pokemon I never planned on using, and then abandon all the useless babies for them to hatch and look after. Who cares? But it would appear that my careless actions had more consequences than I could ever imagine. I watched as the Daycare man turned his back on my character and walked slowly into the building to join his wife. She was sat opposite him at a table, and it was with the two of them that you left your Pokemon to be raised. After taking both Ditto and Eevee in my party, I spoke to the elderly lady. She first asked if I would like to take my other Pokemon back. So I took Butterfree and Scyther into my party, left Eevee and Ditto with her, and thought no more of the situation. Off I hopped on my bike to do a few laps around Goldenrod whilst waiting for Eevee and Ditto to do their thing. I noticed at that point the game seemed a little darker than usual. The blue tone which coats the in-game world during night hours was bordering on black, but nothing else seemed weird at this point. After about 25 laps, I returned to the Daycare Center to find the old man once again standing outside. "Your Pokemon have an egg," he told me. "Would you like it?" And this time, of course, I accepted. "Take good care of it," he said before walking back into the building as he had done so many times before. However, this time he seemed to move even slower than usual, almost as though the game was struggling to get the sprite to walk. I didn't care much about this at the time, as I finally had an Eevee egg, and I was on my way to having my perfect Johto team. I couldn't wait to start training the two together and boosting their happiness levels. I felt very happy at this point, as though nothing could dampen my mood. I proceeded into the building to retrieve my Pokemon, but something wasn't right. The old woman was sat there as usual, but opposite on her left were 2 empty seats. Her husband's sprite was nowhere to be seen. I hurried back outside. Perhaps my Pokemon had bred together again super quickly, and the game was unable to keep up, so the old man would just automatically appear outside again? I hoped that was the case, but to my dismay he was well and truly gone. I began to wonder what had happened. Had my game glitched? How could I ever get another egg? No, there was no way the Daycare man had altogether disappeared from my cartridge. He would be back, I assured myself. I retrieved Eevee from the Daycare woman, but decided to leave Ditto. My party was full, and I figured having a Ditto in Daycare would be useful in the future, provided I was ever able to breed Pokemon again. It was getting quite late, and there was something on TV I wanted to watch, so I saved my progress and turned the console off for the night. I returned to the game the following morning around 10:30 a.m., as I didn't have to work until the afternoon, but sadly to no avail, the Daycare man was still missing. I repeatedly walked inside and outside the daycare center numerous times before giving up. At least I have an Eevee egg, I thought to myself after a while, and continued playing the game. I rode a few laps around Goldenrod, but my Eevee was taking a while to hatch, so I headed back up to Ecruteak. I planned to challenge the gym, so first I went up to the Pokemon Center to heal. However, after leaving the Pokemon Center, I noticed something particularly creepy. Although I was playing the game at 11 a.m., and the in-game clock also said 11 a.m., the screen was very dark as though it were actually the evening. Again, it was an unusual black shade, not just the blue-tinted darkness of regular nights in Pokemon games. I found this really bizarre, and for the first time I felt as though my game was actually broken. It was quite old, but I was sure the save process would be the first to go, not the sprites in the clock system. Nevertheless, I proceeded to the gym. I was very much prepared for the ghost gym and breezed through it with my high-level Feraligatr, who wiped the floor with Morty's team. After taking out his final haunter, the gym leader admitted defeat. "I'm not good enough yet," he said. "Alright, this badge is yours." And then, the screen froze. For a few seconds, I could do nothing. I tapped the buttons and tried to exit the battle, but it was no good. I thought my game had well and truly reached the end of its lifespan and was about to turn it off, when eventually the screen faded and the battle ended. My character was now facing Morty, but no music was playing. The first dialogue box took a few seconds to appear at the bottom of the screen, almost as if the game was moving frame by frame in slow motion. Finally, the black letters started to appear, or so I thought. The text took forever. One letter at a time was shown in a small white box, and there was even longer pause between each word. I had not played the game for a while, and I could not remember Morty's real dialogue, but what was eventually shown in the text box was nothing close to it. I could do nothing but watch as letter by letter the disturbing familiar phrase was formed. "I'll keep it, then. Thanks." Indeed, it read, "I'll keep it then. Thanks." I was incredibly freaked out at this point. It was as though the Daycare man disappearing from my game, and then strangely glitched battles were somehow connected. There was nothing more I could do. The text disappeared, and Morty proceeded to give me the fog badge. When I spoke to him afterwards, he just gave his usual speech about wanting to meet legendary Pokemon. As I exited the gym, it was still dark outside, perhaps even slightly darker than before. I was shaken up, still trying to convince myself that my game was old and therefore faulty, but secretly I was wondering if there could be any more bizarre events. You can imagine how much I jumped when I saw the elderly bearded sprite of the man in the middle of Lavender Town, which was the same as that used for the Daycare man himself. The sprite had never looked so creepy to me before, but my heart actually leapt the moment I saw it. Still frightened, I gathered my courage and decided to ride back down through Goldenrod. Perhaps since the Daycare man's dialogue had returned, he himself may have returned as well? Then maybe everything would go back to normal and I could put this all behind me? Wishful thinking. What I saw was far worse than anything I could have predicted. Not only was the old man still gone, but the sprite of my little Ditto, who I had entrusted in the care of his wife, had also disappeared completely from outside the daycare center. I panicked at this point. I mean, the old man being gone was creepy, but my Pokemon disappearing? That's terrible. Maybe it is just the sprite, I thought, as I approached the old woman sat at the table. And then she uttered those dreaded words. "I'm the daycare lady. Do you know about eggs? My husband and I were raising some Pokemon, and we're shocked to find an egg. How incredible was that? Would you like me to raise a Pokemon for you?" Never had her little speech sounded more traumatic. My Ditto was gone. I had caught him much earlier on, and although he was not the toughest Pokemon, I'd grown quite an attachment to the little pink blob, having nicknamed him Wobbles purely because he looked like jelly. And come on, losing a Pokemon? What could possibly be worse than that? Well, I was about to find out as I clicked the decline of the old lady's kind offer. The screen froze once again as I pressed no. For a moment, the game completely paused, but then, to my horror, the dialogue box reappeared and the old woman repeated herself. "Would you like me to raise a Pokémon for you?" "No!" I shouted, and clicked at the same time. Again a short, silent pause, and she asked a third time. There was no way out. I could not get past her dialogue without leaving one of my Pokémon behind. I was eventually forced to hand over my Stantler. I had never raised a Stantler before, and I was enjoying doing so. It was a very overlooked Pokémon, and not many people had them in their team, so I decided to try out the deer-like Pokémon. I'd even affectionately nicknamed my Stantler Blitzen. However, Blitzen was by far the weakest Pokémon in my party, and I could catch another Stantler at any point in the grass near Ekritik. There, I thought to myself, she's won. Now I'm getting out of this place and never returning. But of course, it didn't stop there. I was foolish to think that it might. "Okay, I'll raise your Blitzen for you. Come back for it later," she said, as though I could. The screen froze and I knew exactly what had happened. My Stantler had been taken away, never to be seen again. And then, dialogue. It was as though I had never left any Pokémon with her. She repeated the same words, tauntingly, and I could not escape the conversation. "Would you like me to raise a Pokémon for you?" "No," I clicked furiously, before shutting my game off. I turned it back on, to which took me right back to before earning my 5th badge. I took a deep breath as I spoke to the gym leader, not fearing for the battle, but instead fearing the repeat of the situation. But what actually happened was much, much worse. Another dialogue box slowly appeared, and letters began forming inside of it. To my utter horror, Morty, as though possessed, simply said, "Would you like us to raise your Pokémon?" I watched in horror as the daycare lady's dialogue was repeated, and once again, I was forced to say yes. I reset the game, planning to deposit my valuable Pokémon into the PC to protect them, but to no avail. The moment my data loaded, I was already in conversation with Morty and the dreaded text was appearing. I was trapped the same way I had been trapped at the daycare center, and I only had two choices: leave all of my Pokémon with Morty, to forever be lost, or restart my whole game. At a total loss, I began helplessly handing my Pokémon over to Morty, being fully aware that I would never get them back. Each time I reluctantly agreed to let him raise my Pokémon, the screen would freeze a little, and I felt a little sicker each time, as I knew this was the point in which my beloved partners had been taken away for good. Finally, I was just down to my Feraligatr and the Eevee egg. "Oh, but you have just one Pokémon. I can't take that," Morty said. The screen froze for a little while, and when it unfroze, things seemed normal. I was finally free, but I felt nothing but defeated and traumatized. I spoke to Morty and the game finally allowed me to battle him for the second time. This time there was no creepy dialogue after the match, the gym leader handed me my badge for the second time, and I left feeling no sense of achievement, but instead a great sense of loss. Even seeing that the game had returned to its normal daylight state, it did not soothe my grief. I began to wonder if I'd be able to progress with just Feraligatr and an unhatched Eevee. Should I go back and recatch the Pokémon I once had, pretend as though it never happened, or start building a new team? One thing was for certain, I was never returning to that daycare center. Is this over now? I wondered. I've lost nearly all my beloved Pokémon, the endless night has passed, and the game seems back to normal. Is this the end of the nightmare? It appeared so, as I continued through Olivine Town in peace. I battled a few trainers and everything seemed fine. I started to calm down and enjoy the game once more. Of course, I was still sad about losing my Pokémon, but I kept reminding myself that they were just pixels and I could recapture them if I wanted. But this was a good opportunity to train some new Pokémon. I caught a Tauros rather than recatching Stantler, and I decided to be optimistic and use this as motivation to build a team of brand new Pokémon that I had never before gotten around to training. And so I was riding through Olivine, enjoying the pleasant music and the cheeriness of the town when a dialogue box appeared. "Huh?" it said. I suddenly felt a lot better. I was on my way to getting an Espeon, one of my favorite Pokémon of all time, although there was no way I was going to attempt getting another Eevee for Umbreon. I could focus on training this little guy or girl to become a powerhouse. I watched anxiously as my egg shook from side to side with the blissful music playing. It cracked once, then twice, then finally a small Pokemon was born. A Caterpie. That was Curse of the Daycare Man. Final thoughts? I really don't have much to say about this story. There wasn't really any substance to it. It's an interesting idea, but what else is there to say? There wasn't any actual reasoning behind anything, but not in a creepy way. There was no moment where you got a chill reading a part. There was no twist. There was no nothing. Even the ending, there is nothing to really say about it. Yes, the main character is given a Caterpie egg rather than the Eevee one. And stories don't necessarily need to have a twist or a big moment to be good, but this didn't really have anything. Just an interesting but not terribly creepy idea, and that's all I really have to say about it. That's it for this week's Creepypasta. Tune in again next Saturday when we read yet another Creepypasta written and sent in by the fans over on my forum. If you'd like to write your own Creepypasta, help peer edit someone's story, or even just read them before they're on my channel, the link to the Creepypasta section of my forum is in the description of this video. You'll also find a link to the playlist of every Creepypasta I've read on the show. Next week we'll do yet another fan-made Creepypasta with Memories of Marowak. Until next time, sweet dreams.